Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the Nvidia TITAN X. More specifically, it's the EVGA TITAN X Superclocked edition with higher base and boost clocks. Aside from the third-party variants of this card, there were actually two different TITAN X's released about a year and a half apart. One was based on the Maxwell architecture and was essentially part of the GeForce 900 generation, and one was based on Pascal, a 10 series card. This one is the earlier Maxwell card, and telling them apart is easy, even at first glance. This older card will just say Titan across the front of it, whereas the later Pascal card actually has a different shaped cooler and will say Titan X in bold letters. On closer inspection, the model and part numbers will be visible on the back of the PCB. It still sounds like a beast, and on paper the 12 gigs of GDDR5 with up-to-date driver support certainly help its case in terms of instant appeal. 7.5 years in hardware terms may as well be 10 years ago, so performance-wise, well, I'm not sure what to expect, but let's address that right now. This is the Maxwell TITAN X Superclocked in late 2022. Back in 2015, this card would have easily been capable of 60 FPS and beyond at 1080p and, well, beyond, so in the interest of paying respects to the card's once legendary status, I felt it right to try and target the frame rate that it would have had no trouble hitting once upon a time. With that in mind, I started with what could be the most demanding of today's tested titles, Cyberpunk 2077. For the graphical settings, I've gone with high crowd density, as our i5-12400F should have no issues with this. I've also gone with high texture quality to put the 12 gigs of GPU memory to work, but everything else has been set to low. I started with the low preset but dropped everything to its respective lowest. The increased texture quality and crowd density settings will do enough to make things look crisp and help keep the city feeling alive, but the lower settings elsewhere will help to maintain a plus 60 FPS average. In this case it was 67, but there were quite a few drops below this, as demonstrated by the percentile lows. Do you think this is a good start for the TITAN X, or did you think it would do better? Let me know in the comments below. Personally, I thought it would do a bit better, but the cool name can only do so much. This is still a very solid result though, and Cyberpunk looks great. The TITAN X is of course a DX12 capable card, so it won't have any issues running any games that are out right now, including Elden Ring, which runs like an absolute treat with this aging flagship. I went in with the high preset from the graphical menu, but disabled motion blur and depth of field as a matter of personal preference. I don't think these options have any effect on the frame rate of the game. As you probably know by now, Elden Ring is capped at 60 FPS by default, and our test system comprising of the i5-12400F, 16 gigs of RAM and the Titan didn't have any issues with hitting and maintaining this figure, with solid 1.1% lows to go along with the average. So far so good, but what I will say this early on is that you shouldn't overpay for one of these. It's not uncommon to see them priced high, but really you only want to be paying a little more than 980 Ti money for them, because while we do get a slightly higher core count over that card and double the VRAM, it's not going to be worlds apart performance-wise. A second-hand and newer 1070 should also be worth considering as well. Thanks to the well-optimised nature of Forza Horizon 5, I was able to go with 1440p and still retain fairly high graphics quality settings, in this case the high preset. The game looks excellent, and even during this multi-competitor race the frame rate held above 60 on average. This goes to show that the Maxwell TITAN X is still capable of higher resolution gaming, but there will definitely be less instances where we can push it beyond 1080p for 60 FPS. If you're happy with at least 30 instead, then your resolution choices will be much more flexible, but I'd rather stick with a lower res and hit a higher frame rate, even though that isn't always necessary. As far as temperatures go, well, you've probably seen this card hit in excess of 80 degrees, but it's by no means running uncomfortably hot or anywhere outside of what I'd expect, and it really doesn't get that loud despite the blower style cooler. I think almost if not all of these had blower style coolers actually, no matter the manufacturer. The card tends to boost to a max of 1278 MHz, higher than stated, though it occasionally pushes a tiny bit higher than that. 1278 seems to be where it stays though a lot of the time. Maybe we could have gone a little bit higher in Spider-Man, but I wanted to account for the dips with the percentile lows. I ended up going for the high preset with any camera effects off as a matter of personal preference yet again. The average stuck well above 60, but we did see a couple of little drops to around the mid-50s. That's by no means a complaint, just an observation, and the reason I went for 1080p high instead of pushing it to very high. We do have FSR 2.0 available here, but I don't think it's necessary, and I always prefer to play at native res where possible. Spider-Man looks stunning with these settings, and the Maxwell Titan X definitely provides a more than playable gaming experience here. I don't seem to be getting anywhere in the story because most of the time I just spend swinging around taking in the sights. It's been a while since a game has just made me want to explore and totally distract me from the story. Another solid result here, but just remember what I said about not paying too much for one of these cards. In Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm using what are often referred to as the Xbox One X equivalent settings, though we are using 1080p instead of 4K. That said, this is the closest representation of what the game looks like on that console in terms of visual settings, and if you've played it on Xbox or PlayStation, I think you'll agree that it still looks excellent. I decided to run around causing carnage in Valentine and the surrounding areas here, and the frame rate appears to be holding pretty steady. Again, I sort of expected more from the Maxwell Titan X, but this is by no means a bad result. Anything higher than 60 is still a win for this card, and we don't have to make any serious sacrifices in order to hit that target. I did try 1440p briefly, and that went okay. We were getting around 45 to 50 FPS, so it's still solid, but not as smooth or as consistent as it is here at 1080p. Again, the card is boosting to 1278 MHz and staying there, which is higher than it says on paper, and we're topping out at just over 80 degrees. You can expect this card to reach over 200 watts of total power consumption too. In Battlefield 5, I decided to try 1440p again, and this time opted for medium. I find that the medium preset gives us a nice balance between quality and performance, especially with a card like this one. It still looks pretty good and the extra clarity is nice, though I would also argue that a lower resolution and as high a frame rate as possible is the way to go, considering the competitive nature of this game. Still, with 2560 by 1440 in the medium settings, the game ran with over 80 FPS on the Maxwell Titan X, and I'm happy with this result. The performance will vary on a map-by-map basis, but this is where we'll sort of be hovering around regardless. It's a decent result, and as you can see, the card is using way over 200 watts of power this time around. That may be another reason why perhaps something like a 1070 could prove more tempting. That's a 150 watt rated card after all. Still, it doesn't sound as cool as Titan X, but gaming isn't about cool names of stuff, unfortunately. Another fairly decent result for this aging enthusiast piece of hardware. Finally, we've got God of War. This one is running at 1080p with a high preset, nothing else has been changed or altered. This is just high, as it is straight from the menu. Over 60 FPS was doable here, and like I've said before, if you're happy with 30, you could turn the resolution up, as well as perhaps the settings. I think I've been sucked in by the name a little bit today. You read Titan X and you think there's no way a card like this will ever start to lose its place at the top, but I guess that's the idea behind marketing and naming of a product. I'm not disappointed with performance by any means, but there have been instances where it hasn't done as well as I thought. But then again, this is a graphics card from 2015, and if I think about it like that, then yeah, we're getting exactly what we should be getting in terms of performance. This thing is still solid at 1080p, just like the 980 Ti and 1070, though don't buy one expecting to be able to hit 60 FPS across the board at anything above that. Overall, the Titan X Maxwell began life as a beast, though it was a beast that didn't make too much sense for gamers. There are still remnants and glimmers of that monster still coming through when you fire up certain games. It's easy to appreciate what it once was, but also easy to get taken in by the dropping prices and the name. It still sounds cool to say, I've got a Titan X out loud, and anyone who's listening will still think that's pretty cool too. Dig a little deeper though, and do a bit of research, and you might find that there are much newer, similar or lower priced options about that will match or outpace this with ease. Thank you very much for watching then. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like down below, leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know what you think of the Titan X Maxwell down below in the comments, of course. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already and you want to, of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.